Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a video and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Today, I am privileged to welcome a very accomplished and senior professional from the social sector, Libby Johnson, to our show. Libby, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Libby is the executive director of Gram Vikas, and he's an expert in entrepreneurship promotion for the UNDP. So, Libby, tell me, what would you say are three key milestones in your career or your life?
I guess I grew up in a village in Kerala, and as long as I was in Kerala, my paternal grandfather was with me, and now I realize a lot of the things that I have done or continue to believe in is actually a contribution from him. I mean, very silent contributions, but the way he trusted people and kind of very open trust, and which I tend to practice, but it's very difficult.
Correct.
And the other one was his ability to do good without others knowing.
Okay.
I end up realizing, particularly after he passed away, and the way my grandmother would recollect stories, and she would be upset because he would have given away something, and you would have come to know it much later. But then the person who benefited from it, would come back and tell us how timely that support was. And
amazing.
Those are two things about him that have continued to influence me. I didn't realize it for a long time. So, but that, now I realize it was quite been one of the most important pillars on which my life view has been
very interesting.
The second was I academically kind of moved into economics because I thought development economics is what I wanted to do. And then I realized it was too theoretical, and a call for admission to the Institute of Rural Management came in. This was midway through my master's in economics, and I gave up that and went to IRMA, where I found the kind of environment that helped me understand the reality around me much better. And very exciting 2 years. And I think the greatest benefit from that was also I found my partner and my best friend and guide, and the person who keeps me sane around all this, Jaya, my wife.
Okay.
So IRMA experience was professionally and personally one of the key milestones in my life. And I think the third, I would refer to three people I worked with in the development sector. My first job was with an organization called Aditi in Bihar, in Patna, run by a very old lady for me at that time. She was almost more than double my age then. She's no more, Vijay Srinivasan, a firebrand feminist, and somebody who influenced my understanding of how men look at women, or how women see men looking at women. And that has been a very key learning for me in my professional life, also to some extent in my personal life. Joe, who's the founder of Gram Vikas, who I continue to work with now, and the third person is Vivekanandan. Vivekanandan was from the first batch of IRMA. Okay. He built this organization of marine artisanal fishermen in the southern coast, and I had an opportunity to work with him for about 3 years. He was, in fact, his job offer came first. I mean, the first job I got out of IRMA was with the Federation of Fishermen's Societies, but then I opted to go to Bihar and work with Vijay. So I think this broad stroke of people and experiences, and particularly the 2 years I spent at IRMA, would be
very interesting
key milestones or serendipities, as I like to.
I agree. Fascinating. So, Libby, let's talk about Gram Vikas. Tell me about this organization and the kind of work you do.
So, Gram Vikas is now 42 years old. Formally started in 1979. But then this group of university students from the then Madras University, in 1971, a large group of them went to the Bangladesh war frontier to set up relief camps. Okay. And some of them moved to Odisha in October 1971 to do relief work after a cyclone that had hit coastal Odisha then. And a group of them stayed back, continued working in the coastal parts of Odisha, where economically and resource-wise much more advanced than the rest of Odisha that we work in now. In 76, they moved to southern Odisha, which was more Adivasi and hilly and all that. And then set up roots there, and Gram Vikas came out as a result of that work of mobilizing Adivasi communities against some of the disadvantages, including both market and state-related exploitation that they were facing at that time. Gram Vikas has evolved, and currently, I think our work is built on this pillar of facilitating communities to build a dignified quality of life. So for Gram Vikas, it's important that the results of our work are felt and seen, and at the same time, it is empowering in the sense of improving the individual and the community. We work very closely with the government, even at times when most NGOs have taken a kind of anesthetic view to working with the government. And we've also been, I'm quite proud of the fact that we've been very, very upfront and in the forefront of actually using technology in rural development. So one of our biggest programs early on was promotion of biogas. And helping build about 55,000 biogas plants at some point across villages of Odisha. And then we moved to water and sanitation. And today we are looking at the new forms of technologies, whether it is renewable energy or information communication technologies, and see how we can demystify this for the use by regular rural men and women.
Very interesting. So, when I was reading about you, I found that your mission is to promote processes which are sustainable, socially inclusive, and gender equitable. Help me understand this with an example.
Oh, heavy words, of course. Let me give you an example of something that we've been doing quite intensively over the last 20 years, which is to help village communities access better water and sanitation. So this we started in the mid-90s when, Swachh Bharat Mission or Jal Jeevan Mission, now the flagship programs of the government, were not even being thought about. I mean, people did not believe that rural folks would build toilets and use them, or tap water in villages was a possibility. So we started something very early in the mid-90s. But we said it is not sufficient that this toilet or a bathing room, which we added to that, or tap water should be the preserve of a few people. So we developed a model called Mantra. So it stands for Movement and Action Network for Transformation of Rural Areas. But basically we said, if something like this has to benefit sustainably, I mean, as in on a long-term basis, everybody in a habitation has to take part. Because the key issue around sanitation was unsafe disposal of human waste was leading to contamination of water, and people were falling ill. So even if one person in the village continued to defecate in the open, people would never be safe from kind of waterborne diseases. So we said it had to be everybody. But then came the challenge of the poorest people in the village. You're asking people to build toilets and bathing rooms for themselves with some support from outside, but more than 50% of the cost had to be borne by them. How do we make sure that the poorest person also gets the same facility?
Correct.
So that process, at the end of which, what happened in the early days, what happened was, you had a village of about 100 people. Everybody has the same toilet bathing room structure.
I see.
It was quite, it looks funny at some point, sometimes, but the house was a one-room hovel made of thatch and mud, but the toilet was concrete.
I see.
And everybody drank water from the same source. So both of this had such incidental, effects on people's psyche and thinking that the poor person started believing more in herself when she saw that, oh, the richest person is also using the same kind of toilet, and we are drinking the same water as they do. So this, this
is amazing.
This, I think, is a spirit of those words. And initially, we only thought about the toilet, but then the women came and said, "Okay, you will build the toilet, we will use that, and then you want us to go back to the pond to bathe." So then we said, "Okay, we can build a bathroom, but will you be able to afford it?" The women said, "Yes, let us try it." Anyway, it's only an additional cost. So the eventual model that came up was with the toilet and the bathing room. And whether it was biogas or in the case of the water, we realized that it was a community development program but the most critical stakeholders were women, because they were the ones who were saving time and effort in terms of, whether it was gathering fuel wood or bringing water for the home. So, that example should kind of give you a sense.
Very interesting. And, just moving on from there, you just mentioned that, if you can share the same toilet and you can share the same water, then, equality automatically comes in. Because I know traditionally, and I guess I don't know much about Indian villages, but from whatever I have read, the biggest challenge used to be on sharing water. Who's entitled to which water, isn't it? So let's move on. What would you say have been some significant improvements in society based on what all the work that you're doing?
So I think the first would be what I just stopped speaking
The
about.
toilet and water is just like,
No, the effect on women.
correct.
How much effort, and women finding much better ways of using their time rather than having to stand in line to collect water, carry heavy load. So
Yeah.
that I think is definitely one of the key changes that we've been able to contribute to. There's been substantial improvement in the hygiene outlook, the sanitation outlook among communities.
Okay.
And that is now generational, because the first village we worked in was in 1996. And now that village has a third generation that has come in, and you can see the, if I may use the word, the urban attitude towards sanitation there compared to the rural. So I think that's something that we have been able to contribute. Gram Vikas also runs 4 residential schools for predominantly Adivasi children in some of the remote areas. The first school, it is now a high school, was set up in 1982. The second one in 92, third in 98, and the third one in 2003. And last year, we had the first medical doctor coming out from that remote area.
Incredible.
Who went to one of the Gram Vikas schools in 1999, I think.
Wow.
Or was it 2000? 2000, some mid 2000. So we kind of preempted government has done substantial work. Odisha government has done very good work in promoting education. But I think our contribution has been to create a whole generation of first-time learners, both in terms of professionals as well as leaders. So I think these 3 I would summarize as kind of the key contribution we've been able.
So, aspirationally, the millennials and the Gen Zs from tribal India, are they very similar to aspirations of any urban millennial?
Oh, you got it right on dot, Ashutosh. Aspirationally, I think they are the same. Because the kind of access to information and the broader worldview they have, minus the language. Most of them don't have the capabilities in English. What is available in Odia or in Hindi, people are consuming, and that is changing the way people look around them and think for themselves. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we as an organization face today.
Very interesting.
This kind of growth and jump in
Generations of the young, isn't it? Fantastic. And you've been working with a lot of the tribal communities in Orissa. And you've been, probably getting such amazing exposure. My question to you is that how has engaging with these communities changed your worldview?
I have, 4 points to share on that. I think I learned equanimity from them. How does one remain not generally cut off, but while being there, take time to form your view. And time doesn't mean many hours, but the kind of process that you follow.
Correct.
I've seen this communities doing in the face of huge adverse events. One tends to look at it as kind of very cold attitude to life, but it's not. Once you touch them, once you understand them, you realize that they have a much more measured view of the world and the life around them. So I think that I have learned substantially from this experience.
Okay.
The balanced view of things around. I think the second is the ability to now optimize rather than maximize. How do you make the best of what is available, because
Correct.
I don't think my growing up in Kerala or my larger exposure in the urban Indian setting really prepared me for that, because there is still a kind of a, you know, accumulate, maximize
Correct.
thing that you live around with in many ways, but optimizing and how to make the best of what is available. And finally, the way you look at things around you, whether it is a tree, whether it's a stream, you know, the Adivasi outlook towards nature, which is very, very, very widely written and discussed about. But the way they look at things, a tree, the value of a tree, being able not to reject something because it looks prima facie valueless. So I think some of these are key points that I realize I have assimilated.
Amazing. Thank you. And when a little while ago, you were talking about using technology. Now, help me understand, how are you using technology to improve the functioning of your organization and improving the lives of all the people you serve?
So even today, Gram Vikas has about 260 full-time employees,
Okay.
spread across 17, 18 locations in Odisha and one location in Jharkhand. About 20% of my colleagues live in areas without mobile connectivity.
Wow.
It's and so you can imagine the kind of population that is around them. So we've over the last several years, we've kind of put in every possible effort, kind of training people in using. So we have now moved, thankfully, we've finally been able to move our daily attendance and our administrative things onto an Android app. And kind of found the ways in which colleagues, even who live in remote areas, are able to connect to, allow them to travel 5 kilometers so they can go twice or three, once in 2 or 3 days, connect to the internet. And so we are now using that also to with the communities. 3 years ago, when I did a quick round of the villages and found a few youngsters, and we've been struggling with the youngsters' involvement in community development, because we've grown up to do community development. And there is much more individual orientation. And generally asking them, what is it that you would like in your village? The most common answer I got was 4G connectivity. We would like 4G connection in our village.
Correct.
No, we don't want to go to a hello point to kind of get connected. So we've been working on, kind of working with the telecom service providers, but also trying to do some jugaad with respect to creating a village-wide network. So the village is Wi-Fi connected. And then the internet connection comes once a day when an operator takes a bicycle, goes from the village server, goes to the network point, and then, kind of syncs data between the two. So we've been doing such jugaad kind of work. A lot of our work is on energy is also around renewable energy, alternate energy, use of solar and micro hydro kind of things. And now the latest that we've started working on is around hydrogeology, understanding the water resources in the village, and more than technology, it's science, and trying to see how we can demystify the science of water and get communities to kind of get more ownership around their water resources and look at the long-term sustainability of availability of water.
Very interesting. So, Libby, I've often spoken to so many people, and I've often said that this is the generation of the millennials and the Gen Zs. And knowing the demographic profile of our country, the entire country has young people. How are the millennials and the Gen Zs of tribal India or tribal Orissa changing the way you work? Substantially, because despite them being young, they are coming to positions of authority in villages, because the elders are realizing that the younger ones have far more knowledge of the world around them, and the elders realize that they need to cede space to these youngsters to, So if you look at in the tribal communities where there's a traditional cultural leadership and the new political leadership, the traditional leadership is still with the older people. Correct.
But the older people are not getting into the political new leadership because they are allowing the youngsters to do that. And that is remarkable because the youngsters are able to bring in a different worldview into the community. It has its challenges. I mean, it's not always possible to, kind of bring them together and gel
Correct.
them together. But
Correct.
the youngster, I mean, the fact that the older people are allowing the youngsters their space, which is not exactly what's happening in our society. Yeah? So that I think is a big way in which the younger ones are influencing how things are. The second is migration. So, I mean, Odisha, there is this infamy of distress migration, but people also coming across large number of opportunistic migration, where younger people choose to go out to, say, Chennai or parts of Kerala, work for 2-3 years, make some money, come back. And then they invest this new wealth in improving their and I've been asking them, why don't you go and stay in Kerala? Then they say, no, but that is not my land. My land is here. And why are you going? Because, of course, I need money and I can't always depend on the government to make things better for me.
Yeah.
And that is the other thing about how much do they depend on the government? Because that is natural in a remote kind of location like that. To how much they want to depend on themselves and look at opportunities to do that.
Very interesting. So, Libby, I'm going to move to the next section of our conversation. I have time for a couple of questions for you personally. My first question is that, Libby, are you doing so much in terms of giving back? You've chosen a life of working in some of the remotest parts of India. What does success mean to Libby?
Well, I'm not old enough yet to have arrived at the answer, but
Agree.
I count the number of nights I go to bed without regrets.
Okay.
Regret of any kind. Did I leave? Because I'm, as a person, I know I'm not very easy to mingle with. A lot of my colleagues actually find it difficult to, they kind of fear me in many ways. So I've become increasingly conscious of that. And my body language, I'm a heavy set person. So my body language often gets, even my daughter, who is 14 years old, sometimes it's very difficult to communicate with you.
Right.
So for me, many of these factors together, at the end of the day, I ask myself, do I have reason to regret today? And when I realize that I don't, I think I've had a successful day.
Wonderful. That's a great answer. And my last question to you, and this is a question related to failure. I've often said, and I have a new book coming on failure in March, that Indian parents don't teach children that it's okay to fail. We're always told, come first, go be in the front of the line, etc., etc. And yet we fail all the time. My question to you is, what have been your learnings from some of your mistakes or your failures?
Well, way too many, but I guess I'll recollect one, which came from the work. So this was early 2002-3 in Odisha, when after the 99 cyclone, we were helping coastal communities, some of the coastal villages, build back their houses. I was young and, wanted to do a lot of stuff. And then I realized that the project everybody else realized that the project wasn't going well. And all of a sudden, I found myself removed from that responsibility. I see it for a long time. And then one day, a very senior colleague of mine called me aside and said, Libby, do you know why you were removed? I said, no, I think, somebody didn't like me or whatever. I was shouting too much. Whatever. He said, you are too soft when you go to the field.
Okay.
If you want to do work with communities of this kind, then you have to be like a coconut.
Okay.
The world need not see how soft you are inside. And this I realized was very true, because I was going around making promises, giving assurances, which I didn't really think about. What is the effect of those? I mean, I wanted to be Mr. Nice.
Correct.
And I wanted to be, or I was just trying to be nice, and people had genuine difficulties, and you're an outsider trying to do good. So this, to me, that project was one of the biggest failures in my life in terms of some of the effects of that will still continue because of the promises I made and then which were wrong promises. So I still have to live with that. But this lesson there of being like a coconut and not being like a mango. The mango is pulpy outside, hard inside. The coconut is hard outside, but soft inside. So that's been kind of the kind of guiding principle also.
Very interesting. Devi, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you. I wish you, Gram Vikas, and everything that you're doing, lots of luck.
Thank you, Ashutosh. And I must say, the remarkable work that you're doing, profiling stories and experiences of this kind. I hope it continues and, wish you the very best ahead.
Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.